Russian President Vladimir Putin is currently paying a state visit to China in June and attending the Shanghai Cooperation Organization summit in the Chinese coastal city of Qingdao, Shandong province. Today, Chinese President Xi Jinping awarded the Friendship Medal of the People's Republic of China to President Putin, which is the first time in Chinese history. What is behind China's first ever presentation of the Medal of Friendship to a foreigner? And will this have any bearing on furthering cooperation between China and Russia during this visit? At the same time, how can China's Belt and Road Initiative be further integrated with Russia's Eurasian Economic Union? And what problems will likely emerge during the Shanghai Cooperation Organization summit due to strained relationship between India and Pakistan? To discuss these issues and more, I'm very happy to be joined in the studio by Xu Jian, who is the Vice President of the China Institute of International Studies, and Professor M.D. Nalapad from the Manipur University, India. We shall also cross over to Victoria Panova in Moscow, who is the Vice President of International Relations of the Far Eastern Federal University. That's our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Yang Rui. Before we get started, let's look at this brief explanation of the Friendship Medal.
The medal is gold and blue, depicting a dove flying over a globe, two hands shaking, and a lotus. The medal symbolizes friendship and unity between the people of China and the rest of the world, and a desire for common prosperity and development. It was created on January 1, 2016, and is awarded for outstanding contributions to China's construction of socialist modernization, communication, and cooperation with foreign countries, and maintenance of world peace. The award is approved by the Standing Committee of the National People's Congress and presented by the Chinese President to acknowledge the awardee's exceptional contributions to the economy, diplomacy, education, science, culture, or industry.
Well, very stylish ceremony to give a highest state honor to a head of a state, Vladimir Putin. Do you think he deserves the honor?
Definitely, because this model is supposed to be honored to people who have made outstanding contributions to world peace, to promoting China's socialist modernization program. And Putin has done this, definitely. I think he deserves this. And he's the first foreign leader to get this medal.
Well, does that also highlight the chemistry between Mr. Xi Jinping and his Russian counterpart?
Well, I think President Xi appreciates the fact that President Putin has placed a very high priority on good relations with China. And I think the relationship between China and Russia, as an analyst, I would say it's been better than almost any other time in the history of these two countries. And for that, I think President Putin and President Xi are responsible. So this medal is, in a sense, a symbol of that kind of cooperation.
Highly symbolic. Ironically, Western media reports would always describe Russia as the former arch-rival of the PRC during the Cold War. Let me go to Victoria Panova, a senior expert of international studies in Moscow. Hello, Victoria, long time no see. What are your thoughts about this defining moment concerning this relationship between Moscow and Beijing?
Well, if we talk about, I think it's really unprecedented relations that we now have between our two countries. And I think Putin just mentioned yesterday, even during their direct line with their people from Russia, that it's really a model. And we've been pursuing this model of relations for several years already. And I think not a single other two countries can actually boast the same intensity, friendship, intensity of relations, friendship, and actually desire to move forward. So I think this is very important that we continue this. And from what you remember, I think it's 25th meeting of the two presidents. This year, there will be a number of other meetings between the two heads of our states, but I do believe this one and also the continuing SCO summit would be really significant and breakthrough meeting that we're to witness this time.
Why did the two leaders, Mr. Xi Jinping and Mr. Putin, decide to choose the high-speed railway and travel together to Tianjin, and they're going to watch a ice hockey match? Is that the personal favorite game of your president? Victoria?
Sorry?
Yes? I know Putin is a fan of sumo wrestling, martial arts.
Yes.
He visited the Shungshan Temple of Shaolin arts, martial arts. Ice hockey might be yet another favorite game of your president. The two leaders, Xi Jinping and Putin, will be traveling to Tianjin on high-speed train. So what do you think of this arrangement?
Well, I think this is, they will be watching their youth hockey games in Tianjin, and this is just a significance of, those are their two men that enjoy spending time together, and as you know, this is probably the only leader with whom and they're eager to spend with each other their birthday when it happens this way. So this hockey game watching together is another symbol of their kind of banding together, and they're able to discuss very important strategic questions in an informal entourage, and actually to demonstrate that we have high level of cooperation, not only in just signing business deals. There are more than 20, from what I know, that are expected to be signed this time, but also they demonstrate that our relations between both leaders and between the countries, they are ripe and in all areas, be it culture, be it sports, be it trade. We're looking forward for bigger potential, and we're hoping for more than 100 billion, to break the figure of 100 billion finally in our trade turnover. So that's how
I wonder if Mr. Xi Jinping is likely to visit or attend the opening ceremony of the Russian World Cup tournament. He is a big fan. I mean, Xi Jinping is a big fan of football. But anyway, the hockey game reminds me of the ping-pong diplomacy between the United States and China in 1972, when Richard Nixon came over for the ice-breaking visit and opened the door between the two major countries at the height of the Cold War. Now, this time around, what do you think of the chemistry between Putin and Mr. Xi Jinping?
I think this arrangement has several significances. On the one hand, I agree, it provides a relatively relaxed environment for two leaders to exchange views. But on top of that, there are also two other special significance. One is it signifies that the Sino-Russian cooperation in the field of high-speed railway might become a focus. Infrastructure.
Construction of infrastructure.
Yes.
Mr. Putin spoke of during the interview with Mr. Shanghai Cooperation, head of the China Media Group.
Yes, exactly. May become the focus.
He just wants to have a personal feeling about how it's like to be on board.
Exactly. So it just has a symbolic significance to take the high-speed railway from Beijing to Tianjin, to symbolize the future prospect of Sino-Russian cooperation in this area. And the second significance is about the winter sporting. As you know, ice hockey is maybe very popular in Russia, but in China, few people know this kind of sport. But China is going to host the 2022 Winter Olympic. So it might be helpful to promote China's, the level of China's Winter Olympic game.
Yes, indeed, the Russians, of course, enjoy apparent better competitive edge in Winter Olympics, in the winter competitions. And therefore, we should draw a lot of inspirations from their brilliant performances on the ice and snow. Other than sports diplomacy, what do you think of the background against which this state visit was paid by Putin. I mean, the strained trade relationship between the United States and China. Fortunately, ZTE has been pardoned somehow after fining up to $1.4 billion. So, do you think this is a policy of leniency, or is this a compromise after hours and hours of negotiation, nail-biting negotiations between the two sides?
Well, I'd like to say that the U.S. is not going to be comfortable with the fact that China, in a relatively short time, is calculated to become the world's largest economy. I can't believe that any top economy would ever like to have its the second economy overtake. I mean, Japan was very unhappy, frankly, when China overtook Japan. So I mean, there's no doubt about that. But I would like to say that in my view, both Russia and China don't believe in a multipolar world. They don't believe in a unipolar world. And after the Cold War and after the collapse of the Soviet Union, the world was seen as unipolar, that you have the United States as the sole superpower, and frankly, all other powers way below that. I don't think this is acceptable to China or Russia or frankly India. So I think this relationship is also part of the effort to create an architecture which is multipolar.
Multilateralism is something that is preferred by Europeans, Russians, Indians, and the Chinese. I wonder if Victoria agrees.
Well, obviously, this is something that and if you remember the recent meetings of the foreign ministers, but it's also a constant repetition of the stance within BRICS, for example, where both Russia and China, but also India, which is part of SCO, are present, and this is about the multipolar world. So this is about their not acceptance of the world which is unipolar, where only one country dominates the discourse, makes the rules and kind of imposes it on other countries. So I believe this is a genuine understanding of how their world should function, and this is why both countries work for these ends. They very often have either similar or even identical stand, and the basis for the stand, I believe.
Yes, the two
exactly
permanent members of the UN Security Council tend to consult each other on issues of critical urgency in the multilateral body of the United Nations. That has set a very good example for power politics. Having said this, Victoria, President Xi Jinping and Mr. Putin have met 26 times. That's indeed an impressive number of high-level meetings. And this bilateral relationship is called Comprehensive Strategic Partnership of Coordination, and it's also called high-level relationship of this nature. I'd like to have your interpretation about the so-called high-level partnership, Victoria.
What we're talking about is that we're talking about their two countries' high-level partnership in order to promote this multilateral world, right? And we're talking about identical views in the United Nations. You rightly mentioned a number of conventions where we actually come out as co-authors, be it internet governance, be it space non-militarization, de-weaponization, be it many other issues. And this is exactly, and we work on that either parallel or together, and I think that is why there is high potential also for joint efforts that are to be, and joint initiatives, and also what China is trying to put forward within the Shanghai Cooperation Organization or other multilateral fora, if this is what was your question.
Thank you so much. Professor Nalapad, during the Cold War, Russia was an ally of the Soviet Union. But today it seems Prime Minister Modi opts for a more balanced diplomacy, a comprehensive one with Russia, China and the United States. With this latest round of enlargement of the SCO, do you think India will be granted more opportunities to have brilliant performance and to balance the powers, to be a catalyst for the current ongoing process of geopolitical reconfiguration?
Well, I'd like to say that India and the United States are definitely becoming good friends. It began during the time of George W. Bush. It increased under Barack Obama, and under President Trump, the relationship is becoming even stronger. But at the same time, India is not going to forget its old friends. And Russia has been a very steady and reliable friend of India for more than 60 years, which is why after meeting President Xi Jinping in Wuhan, Prime Minister Modi traveled all the way to Sochi to have a personal dialogue with President Putin. The idea is to balance the relationships. It's not exclusive. It's not zero-sum, the way certain countries play their games. It's win-win. The way, for example, I think the Chinese favor. And in a win-win situation, you balance between Russia, China, and the United States.
Yeah.
Go ahead. How do you characterize the comprehensive strategic partnership of coordination?
Between China and Russia?
Of course, between Russia and China. We're talking about this bilateral relationship.
Definitely Sino-Russian relations are in the best period of history, even in comparison with the period of Sino-Soviet friendship. Because at that time, that kind of friendship was not something that can be continued for a long time. It's not sustainable. So in this sense, it's in the best period of history. It's reflected in many aspects. It's reflected in the high-level mutual trust in terms of politics, in strategic terms. And it is also reflected in the constant improvement of mechanism of coordination and cooperation between the two sides. And it's also reflected in the widest of the coverage of cooperation and the depth of cooperation between both sides.
What do you mean by the depth of cooperation? Is
Well,
that because of the arms supplier, energy collaboration? You need to be more detailed concerning the substantial collaboration.
Well,
we know it's symbolic, we know it's important, but in what areas we have a remarkable progress?
Well, for instance, in the strategic areas, China and Russia has conducted very effective and very significant coordination and cooperation.
Are you talking about the war games, military maneuvers?
No,
you need to be more specific
including
about
military maneuver, a joint military maneuver in the Baltic Sea last year, for instance, and more importantly, including the coordination on strategic issues, for instance, on the critical situation in Northeast Asia, right? If you look at the view done by director of the CCTV, director of the CCTV, prior to President Putin's visit to China, he talked about the situation in Northeast Asia. He said Russia's policy is in full consistent with that of China on this point. And also, both sides have also enjoyed very good cooperation in the area, for instance, Syria, in the area of on nuclear issue, Iran nuclear issue, amongst others. So it's very important. On top of that, of course, Sino-Russian have conducted a very close military cooperation in many fields. So, and also in economic fields, the cooperation is deepening as well. For instance, in recent years, both sides have made great achievements in energy cooperation, in civil aviation cooperation, right? Both sides will jointly manufacture the commercial aircraft, so-called CR-929, and in the infrastructure building of high-speed railway we just mentioned, and also in agriculture, agricultural cooperation. last year has become the fastest area of growth in Sino-Russian bilateral cooperation. The bilateral trade in agricultural field has surpassed $4 billion. So very substantial cooperation. And the total amount of bilateral trade of last year is about 87 billion. It's not an insignificant amount for those countries.
Let's look at the SCO and its future. Professor Nalapad, do you think Iran is likely to be recruited?
Well, I think yes, because Russia, China, India, we're all friends of Iran, and we all respect the Iranian nation and the Iranian people. You will notice that India recently collaborated with Iran to open the Chabahar port. And I'm happy to say that there was no protest from either Israel or the United States. Neither President Trump nor Prime Minister Netanyahu protested against the fact that we have opened with the Iranians a port which can be used by everybody. So our relationship with Iran is very strong. And I mean, I'm not speaking for the government, but I do believe that the people of India would be delighted if Iran were to become a full member of SCO.
Victoria, what are your thoughts about the future of having Iran as yet another member, a full member of the SCO? What would be the impact for the United States, which has just pulled out of the Iran nuclear deal?
First of all, I think that we already have SCO is one of their most powerful groupings, because I think it's over 43% of population of all the countries that are members of it. Now we have number 8 countries after India and Pakistan joined. When we talk about Iran, that would also mean that we are talking about those countries having kind of not similar views on international security, on how we deal with their nuclear deals, how we talk about international law, and how we actually honor obligations taken and international law as a whole. And this would probably be another sign of that this country is kind of part of one of the most powerful groupings in the world, and which talks about security, which started talking from the start and is now continuing to do so about energy, and it also turning into economy as well. So I think this is this would be a very important signal.
But this is a high-risk game, I'm afraid, to involve Iran in the SCO framework. For example, we have the proxy wars in both Yemen and Syria between Shiites and Sunnis. And Tehran is currently at loggerheads with Washington on the issue of nuclear proliferation. Israel is the public enemy #1 of the Persian state. So if we were to recruit Iran, as Professor Nalapad said, it might be a strong possibility, then SCO threatens to antagonize and at least alienate these powers, Saudis, Israelis, and Americans, right?
Well, look, I'd like to say quite clearly that, for example, Indonesia is another country which possibly in the future could be part of SCO. The reality of the situation is we can't have a global situation in which some countries decide that these countries are good and these countries are bad, and you have no right to decide for yourself which countries are good and which countries are bad. We decide for you. No, that the era of colonialism is over. Countries are free. The smallest countries can decide for their own. So my point is very simple. Now, as I said, India, we have a very good relationship with Iran. So far as Syria is concerned, we recognize President Assad as the head of Syria. The ambassador of President Assad is there in Delhi, and the United States may not like it, European Union may not like it, but that's all right. That's their opinion, we have our opinion. So I think SCO should have its own opinion, and I reiterate, I think bringing Iran and possibly Indonesia into the SCO may be a very good idea.
The participation of Iran into that CO is a possibility, but I don't think it will happen very soon. If only because the SAOF has just finished the first round of expansion with the accession of India and Pakistan as a full member. And after the first round of expansion, SAO has actually become the biggest regional international organization because it captures a quarter of the world GDP, and about 43% of the whole population in the world, and about 23% of the global territory. It's already huge, very, very huge.
It's about the huge continental mass of Eurasia.
So,
but the next issue is, are you confident and hopeful that the Eurasian Economic Union, that's the brainchild of President Putin, will be smoothly integrated with the Belt and Road Initiative? I mean, a few years ago, Russians were very hesitant. They were not sure whether the Belt and Road Initiative will be a blessing for the future of the bilateral relationship. But currently, there's no problem. There's no problem.
Russia used to be very skeptical about the order on the influence, on its impact on Russia's plan of Eurasian Economic Union. But recently, I think Russia's attitude has changed very significantly.
What's the driving force behind their changed attitude?
The main driving force is because of the complementary nature between the two programs. Right. This kind of change in Russia's attitude is mainly reflected by the agreement signed last month between China and the members of Eurasian Union in Astana on 17th May. And in this treaty, both sides agreed on many issues, many important arrangements, mechanical arrangements concerning tariff cooperation, and trade facilitation, and protection of intellectual property, and governmental procurement, etc.
Professor Nalapad, how do you assess the prospects of having Russia as yet another strong competitor of the United States? I mean, it has the most formidable nuclear arsenal that can overkill the United States many times. But in terms of its economy, it underperforms seriously. So what do you think of the future of having yet another Russian polar bear?
Well, you know, actually Russia has had an unfortunate history, even during the Soviet era, and after that, frankly, Yeltsin was not a very good leader of Russia. In fact, it's Vladimir Putin who has frankly managed to hold Russia together and who has once again made Russia a great power. The reality is, in my way of thinking, there are 4 countries that in my view are present or future great powers, and that is China, the US, Russia and India. And of that, 3 are members of the SCO.
That would not be necessarily a blessing for the presidency of Donald Trump, who seeks to survive the midterm elections and who wants to win the trade war with the PRC. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.